Well, hello there, and welcome to day 50 of A Film a Day. Finally, I've made it 50 videos, or 50 main videos. I know it's an arbitrary number, all things considered, but you gotta mark these things. And so I thought, let's try and, build up to this. So, of course, on my channel, I've been announcing the 50th is coming, getting suggestions, creating polls, and after all of that, finally, I watched Lawrence of Arabia, the 1962 epic historical war drama. What did I think? It's interesting because one is always worried with a film like this. There was a lot of build-up, especially once we realised the running time being 3 hours and 49 minutes. And my concern is, I traditionally am not a war drama fan. You have to work very hard to make a good war genre film that interests me. Like last year's 1917 did something really interesting with the platform. And of course, in my previous video, I discussed quite heavily how much The Deer Hunter was not a film I enjoyed the experience of watching, particularly because of its overly long running time. And so we get to this, here we are, 3 hours 49 minutes, and I think it's great. I think it is as epic and classic as everyone has said it is. It is incredibly powerful, incredibly well-made storytelling that's both personal but also broad, with commentary, it's a social commentary that's more relevant now than it was even at the time, or at least as relevant now than it was at the time, with very personal stakes and also grand political stakes. Speaking of 1917, I remember just before it came out, I was saying the biggest problem I had with war films is that really, for a long time, the only two wars that seemed to be covered in mainstream media were World War II and the Vietnam War. And then, of course, 1917 came out, and of course this was surprisingly set not only in World War One, but exploring a conflict that isn't your sort of go-to stereotypical trench warfare. It's exploring a completely different world to the culture of World War One as we imagine it from 100 years ago. I often say that when it comes to presenting history, especially foreign cultures, historical foreign cultures, I followed the mantra that they should be as alien to us as a fantasy world or a science fiction world, because why not? These places are rich and their cultures are different, and their society, there's something familiar, but there's something very different about how it works. And so, it might not be in the presentation of the culture. You might go, oh, well, that people are what people are. But in terms of the cinematography and the scope and the look, the camera should make you feel like you're in a different world. I've said before about Apocalypse Now. When you're watching Apocalypse Now, you don't feel like that's like anything unless you've been to a war like that. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like the world of Apocalypse Now. And similarly with the Lawrence of Arabia, you might have been to Egypt, you might have been to any part of Middle East or Asia now, or however long ago, but you will not be able to experience the world of Arabia as it's presented here. This is so unique. It is a unique experience and perspective, and you cannot recreate. You cannot experience that. There are two functions for cinema. The two core foundational functions. Cinema is a machine for empathy, and cinema takes us to places that we could never go in our real life. And if cinema can achieve those two things, then it is doing its job. I don't really know, because again, this is such a classic film. I don't really, what it is what it is. It's the story of a British man who is trying to help recapture Damascus with the help of the local Arab tribes who he unites, and it's that is the story. It feels almost ridiculous to kind of go over the premise in that respect. Peter O'Toole, I didn't know until minutes before I started making this video. Peter O'Toole, this is his first film, and Peter O'Toole creates such a powerful arc in this, and such a rich and character that you can invest in from point one. I kept thinking about Breaking Bad and the story of the premise of Breaking Bad is you see Walter White go from being the beginning of the show being Mr. Rogers to the end being Scarface. And how does one go from one to the other? And I think it definitely takes its cues from Laurence of Olivier. Oh, I did it. So I keep making this mistake where, as I talk about the film, I keep saying Laurence of Olivier. I don't know why. A strange phenomenon. It's been happening for days now. Lawrence of Arabia. The arc of Lawrence, of T.E. Lawrence, is such a powerful story of a mild-mannered British man who becomes this almost deified figure. He becomes part of the culture around him and it consumes him. And then, of course, the tragedy of his story insofar as it consumes him and then he has nothing left. And he can't be part of that culture because he is not part of that culture. But when he goes home, he can't really go back because the person he is doesn't exist in the world, in that contemporary for then British culture. And so you get this sense of a man being changed. And 3 hours, 49 minutes, one would think it is too long for a film. It is just far too long. And there are some strange quirks that we immediately picked up watching this version. So we watched the ultra high definition restored version available from Amazon. And immediately when you start watching it, you get given a black screen and 4 minutes of soundtrack. And initially, we were thinking there was something wrong because we just were like, why are we not getting to the film? And of course, you do get into the film after these 4 minutes. And again, you have an intermission, which actually plays the length of an intermission. So really, it cuts it away a bit. But honestly, 3 hours, 40 minutes is about as long as you needed to tell his story. At no point was I bored. It really did invest you in the landscape, in the people, and it is incredibly rich. So that like Lord of the Rings, by the time you get to the end, yes, you're exhausted from the experience, but you have earned that tiredness. You feel that sense that you have completed a story. In that respect, it's very novel-like. It has a prologue and an epilogue, and there are sections of it that pace like chapters in a book. And of course, it's based on his memoirs, even though a bit of trivia that his brother wouldn't allow the title of his memoir to be used because he wasn't happy with the portrayal of the real, of T.E. Lawrence, who of course is a real person. The chemistry between T.E. Lawrence and Sheriff Ali is so powerful, and it's very hard not to look at it from a contemporary perspective. And of course, the reading around it, there are suggestions that Lawrence himself was gay, or at least closeted gay, or something to that effect. But even still, watching this film, and it might be a contemporary perspective thing, but you watch it and you think that's a romance. You see them, the chemistry in such a way that they go from enemies to friends to having this intense, passionate relationship that you can't not apply this romantic subtext to it, especially in the last 30 minutes. It's just the way you see the tragedy as Lawrence is tortured, is broken, and then becomes this bloodthirsty tyrant. And you watch Ali, who as I say, there is a love for him, whether it's romantic or just platonic. Watch this person he care about become something he no longer recognizes, and you see his heart break. And again, from a contemporary reading of it, that there is something romantic about that and tragic about that. It's interesting because the arc really goes from Lawrence going from the sort of posh, like I say, the posh-spoken British to the tyrant, to this bloodthirsty warmonger. And what you notice with Ali is the fact that he goes the other way. When we first meet him, the very famous scene where the David lean lens, that's only used in Lawrence of Arabia exclusively. Of course, the shot of him coming in from the distance, going up and shooting a man, and just saying, "Well, he was using my well," and you think this is a villain, or this is going to be an antagonist to our hero. But over the course of the film, you see him, whether by his own devices or by the influence of Lauren, become more diplomatic, become more desiring to become more political, and try to transition into the politics rather than the bloodshed of the world around him. And so by the end, he leaves wanting to try and, fix his world from a political standpoint. Conversely, I suppose I should talk about one of the big problems with the film, which of course cannot be avoided. It wasn't avoided with Breakfast at Tiffany's, and it cannot be avoided here. The racial portrayal of Prince Faisal by Alec Guinness is a really difficult thing for me to process. I was talking with Helen a few days ago we were talking about the difficult relationship we have with, for lack of a better term, blackface in cinema. And of course there are outright offensive portrayals of it, but then you have your difficult ones, the ones where it's hard to sort of process. For instance, Laurence Olivier, yes, it all comes back around. Laurence Olivier is a fellow, where Laurence Olivier, a fellow, the fact that it is one of the only exclusively black, like it is stated, it is a black character, and the fact it's still played by a white man in blackface is not good. But Laurence Olivier really gives a powerful performance because he is, one of the greatest theatrical actors of British culture entire, and so it's hard to process that. And depending on what mood I'm in, depends where I sit in that respect. Similarly, Alec Guinness here, it is difficult because there are accounts that say that he resembled the real world Prince Faisal, and people almost mistook him. And he gives such a powerful, again, sorry, I keep using the word powerful, but such a complex character performance, and it feels authentic. And yet again, it is a version of blackface. And unfortunately, I leave this viewing going, he gave such a performance and I wanted to see it. And so therefore, I almost overlook it, which is great. But the racial connotations of that are not. They're not, because it's difficult because it is not acceptable now. And yes, you could say, well, it wasn't acceptable. It was at the time, and you've just got to accept that's how things were. And yet, you have to hold yourself to a standard, and it's very hard when you create that double standard by saying, well, Alec Guinness was wonderful, and so therefore, hand wave. And so I don't know where I settle on that, but it has to be addressed in that respect. Because otherwise, with Omar Sharif playing Sheriff Ali, wonderful actor, wonderful. I look forward to seeing him in Dr. Zhivago. I look forward to seeing, because he's such a rich performer. The fact that a lot of the background actors were Jordanian people who military, and so it really does embed itself in the richness of the culture, or at least it tries to create an authenticity in the culture, and then it's just that oversight. It's interesting in terms of the political commentary of this film. That's something else that I really drew my attention. Is the fact that there's something really interesting about the story of a man like Lawrence coming into Arabic culture, actually doing something positive, doing positive change, but then ultimately failing and it corrupting him instead of and it falling apart. Because there are, like I said, there are things about this that are as relevant now as they were then. And if you look at things like, the military history of the British Empire and even the post-colonial Britain in the Middle East whole, really, or even the American involvement in things like, in Afghanistan, going back to the 80s, right to, from the 80s to now, you see that same situation. That narrative is so universal. The idea that this story is about a man who unites warriors, has them fight for him, and then tries to teach them or tries to have them become politicians, and it just falls apart, and it creates a culture of tension that is entirely the product of Western interference and us believing we can apply Western ideals to a culture that really works very differently to our own. And that kind of commentary, the fact that it's so universal, is very powerful. Again, powerful, yes. And of course, just to close on, I suppose, it is the cinematography is phenomenal. David Lean, I actually haven't seen many of his films, and of course there are now 3 that are on my list, which are of course Brief Encounters, Bridge to the River Kwai, and Dr. Zhivago, because yes, this is demonstrably his crowning glory. The cinematography in this is on a level that I have seen probably half a dozen times, and it is extraordinary. Of course, the music as well. I've got to give it to the music. Maurice J. The fact that he was one of 4 composers and the only one left standing, created this wonderful score. Again, influential. Perfect cinematography, perfect music. This film is phenomenal and is up there. No regrets at all for seeing this, and I'm so glad that this could be my 50th. So I'm sure I'll do a lead up to 100 at some point, but back to the usual lists. I'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.